Hey guys, welcome to my beginner Shaman deck guide. This is the next deck on my beginner series. I think I've covered Mage, Warrior, and Paladin so far, and so this is the fourth one. And to start off explaining about the purpose of this deck, Shaman's a very unique class. A lot of people say it's one-dimensional and geared towards early game or mid game, which is to an extent true because Shaman doesn't have a lot of great card draw action, card draw abilities. Uh, but one thing that Shaman does have is that it does have a clear win condition built into its basic cards. Uh, so if we look under 5 mana, this card, Bloodlust, is a key card in the basic Shaman deck that we are using. So for 5 mana, it gives your minion plus 3 attack. If we manage to find ourselves in a situation where we're ahead on board and we have maybe 4 to 6 minions, or we play this card, there's a good chance we win the game at that point. So this basic deck, it only has 2 commons and the rest are basic cards, just like the other decks. And it's built around this card and trying to give us a board advantage in the first, maybe 5 or 6 turns, and then playing this on turn 7 to 10 and winning the game with it. So I'm going to run through all the cards that we have in the deck. The first card we have in the deck is Lightning Bolt. For 1 mana, deals 3 damage. It is a common card from the basic set. From the classic set, sorry. Does 3 damage and has an overload of 1 mana. So this is a really useful card for 1 mana, which allows us to kill off our opponent's 3 mana or 2 mana minion. It also allows us to potentially finish off our opponent if the Bloodlust isn't enough, if we manage to rush them down before they can put up a good enough board, and maybe they're only on a couple of HP left. This could be the finishing blow. For 1 mana, it's a pretty good value card. Next for 1 mana is Rockbiter Weapon. Very similar to Lightning Bolt for most intents and purposes. It does not have the overload drawback that Lightning Bolt has, but the drawback that it does have is that this gives a friendly character plus 3 attack instead, which means that it doesn't go through taunt. And if you give it to your hero and attack an opponent's minion with it, your hero will take damage. However, the fact that it doesn't have any overload means that this is a great value card for 1 mana. Next is our 1 mana minion, Goldshire Footman. This is a 1/2 with taunt. And I chose to pick this over some of the other basic 1 mana minions is because of its high toughness. Makes it a bit harder to kill off with 1 mana area effect abilities that Warrior has. It's also not a dead draw in the late game because you could potentially play this card and use it to tank a much bigger minion that our opponent has. And maybe if we have a few other small minions on the board, this will distract our opponent from killing off those minions. It also synergizes well with the next card that I am going to go over, which is Flame Tongue Totem. This is a great basic Shaman card that is used in pretty much all Shaman decks in a competitive level as well. It's a 2 mana 0/3 which gives adjacent minions plus 2 attack. Now this synergizes a lot with our small minions because we can basically use a small minion to attack a bigger minion, and then both minions die, and then the bonus plus 2 attack is given to our next small minion on the board that slides off next to the Flame Town Totem. So this is a very nice card. However, it's very weak if it happens to be the only minion that you have on the board. It also synergizes really well with Goldshire Footman because you don't really need the extra attack that 2/1 1 mana minion has if you have this card next to it giving you the plus 2 attack bonus. The next card we have for 2 mana is Murloc Tidehunter, Battlecry Summon of 1/1 Murloc Scout. So this gives 2 minions for 1 mana, which is primarily the main reason why we have this card in this deck. And it synergizes really well with Flame Tongue Totem and Bloodlust because of the fact that it summons 2 minions for 1 card. So this is a nice value card for 2 mana. That's also part of the basic set. Next for 2 mana is Novice Engineer, a 1/1 Battlecry draw card. So Shaman typically struggles with their card draw mechanics, particularly in the middle or late game. And this card gives you a good cycle card, not something that you want to put down on turn 2, of course. unless you have no other choice. We do have a few other 2 mana minions, but this is a pretty good card in the main game. We can play it to cycle a card and pick up another more useful card. And the 1/1 body is a bonus. Next for 2 mana, we also have Rival Crocodile, which is a 2 mana 2/3. Again, I chose the card with more hit points as opposed to the 3/2 Bloodfen Raptor for the same cost because of the fact that we have cards like Bloodlust, Rockbiter Weapon, and Flametown Totem to compensate for this card's lack of damage. And the extra 1 toughness, the extra 1 HP, excuse me, makes a bigger deal because it allows us to trade with a smaller minion and potentially live. And also is less vulnerable to our opponent's area effect abilities, which they're more likely gonna be looking to use against our more aggressive deck. Next for 3 mana is Hex, transform minion into 0/1 Frog with Taunt. It's a very useful card, very similar to the Mage's Polymorph, which transforms into a 1/1 Sheep. The difference, of course, is that this is a 0/1 card, but it has Taunt. And this is a very big deal, which a lot of players forget when planning their turn, is that this frog does come with Taunt. So that is the drawback, but it is such a great value card that we can use to get rid of our opponent's minion. Next for 3 mana we also have Razorfed Hunter. Similar to the Murloc Tide Hunter, this card gives you 2 minions at once, which synergizes really well with all our buff cards that we have. Next at 3 mana is Shattered Sun Cleric. A solid value 3 mana drop. 3/2 that gives a friendly minion +1/+1. It's useful on our bigger minions, it's useful on our smaller minions to help them trade up into stronger minions. Overall, a good basic card for 3 mana. Then at 4 mana we have is where we start to spike up in power level and really amp up the pressure. The first card is a Chillwind Yeti, which is a 4 mana 4/5, the benchmark for all 4 mana minions. It has great value stats. 9 stats for 4 mana is really good. It's hard to kill with smaller minions and has potential. If we buff it, it has potential to kill off even 6 mana minions quite easily. Speaking of being the benchmark of 4 mana minions, our second common here is a 4 mana 7/7 with Overlord 2. And this is a card that, as a beginner player, you can't really afford to leave out of your deck if you have it, because the value that this card gives is just huge. It puts a lot of pressure on your opponent, especially if they can't kill it with one card. It's almost guaranteed to give you great value. So the Overlord is a bit of a drawback, but we don't have, aside from Bloodlust, we don't have that many great 5 mana cards anyway. And it's not Bloodlust is not something that you want to play on turn 5 unless our opponent, doesn't put any minion in the first 4 turns. Because we do want to trade a little bit our minions if possible. But yeah, so having only 3 mana on turn 5 is not the biggest of deals for this deck. Uh, Later on, in a more advanced Shaman deck, people tend to have cards like Doomhammer, the 5 mana weapon, epic weapon that Shaman has, and that can kind of get slowed down by this card. But for us, I don't think we need to worry about it too much. Next for 4 mana is Gnomish Inventor. Similar to the Novice Engineer, this card is a good cycle card. The difference is that the battle cry is the same, but the difference is that this card has 2/4 worth of stats. So the Novice Engineer's 1/1 worth of stats is pretty much gonna die to anything. It will die to Mage Hero Power. It'll get killed by pretty much any minion that your opponent puts on the board. However, a Gnomish Inventor costs 2 more mana, is 4 mana in cost, but a 2/4 body means that it will survive when trading against 3/2 minions, which are most of the minions being played at that cost 2 mana. 2/4 is also has a good chance of surviving against 3 mana minions, because 3 mana minions are usually something like 3/3s or 3/4s. So this is not a bad body to put on the board for 4 mana. Even though ideally we want a 4/5, but this card still gives a decent value. So this 2/4 worth of stats probably costs about 3 mana, and the card costs the other mana, which makes this a 4 mana card. Next for 5 mana is the key card of this deck, Bloodlust. Give your minions +3 attack this turn. Fantastic card, used in a lot of Shaman decks. Sometimes they will only run one copy, but for the purpose of this basic deck, we want to run two copies. Ideally, we want to swarm our opponent with small minions. Use cards like Lightning Bolt, Rock Biter Weapon, and Flame Tongue Totem to kind of kill off their taunt minions, and then finish it off with a Bloodlust. Hopefully, we have a minion advantage and do something like 15 to 20 damage in one turn. But we still have one more card in this deck, which is a basic Shaman card, and this is also a great card. Fire Elemental, a 6 mana 6/5, and with a battle cry, deal 3 damage. So this is the only basic deck I think where we don't run Boulder Fist Ogre, which is 6 mana 6/7. Hold on a second. Boulder Fist. This is the only deck we don't run this card in, and we run this card instead. So the Boulder Fist Ogre gives great value, 6/7 for 6 mana, whereas this card is a 6/5 with a battle cry deals 3 damage. And that adds a lot of flexibility to the card because we could kill off potentially a minion that our opponent already has down on the board just by playing this card. A 6/5 stats is the benchmark of what I would say for 5 mana minions with no ability. So essentially we are getting this 3 damage for 1 mana, which is great value. If you consider the fact that Lightning Bolt does 3 damage and has an overload, this is fantastic value for a basic card, which is why we have this card in instead of Boulder Fist Ogre. However, you might also decide to put Boulder Fist Ogre in and maybe take out Chillwind Yeti, because we do have 6 4 mana minions. It's down to preference, but I tend to prefer this build because the fact that we put down 4 mana minions still is still playable on the same turn as a Bloodlust, later on in the game. So yeah, thanks for watching this deck, my guide on this deck. I'll post up a more upgraded version later on. Uh, it will be a more mid-game hunter, mid-game shaman kind of build with a couple of rares. But yeah, this deck is actually quite strong for a basic deck. In fact, I would say that it's probably the strongest basic deck that you can make. Um, and I think that the second strongest would probably be Mage or Warrior, but this one I think takes the cake as the strongest basic deck that I can make with only 2 commons, simply because the win condition is so clear, where other classes have to grind it out with basic cards and getting value. This one doesn't have to do that. Bloodlust allows us to have a clear established win condition that we can use when playing against our opponents. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you have fun playing Hearthstone, and see you on my next video.